So you have this like strange situation where psychedelics are, for the most part, illegal and highly stigmatized, and people think they're addictive and they're actually not. At the same time as we're prescribing all of these opioids, benzodiazepines, and highly addictive medications which are perfectly legal. I would love to see a world where we could go into a safe environment, whether that is a clinic, a more medical environment, or perhaps an environment where people have trained with different medicines and have that expertise without it needing to be a certificate on a wall. So there's a real breadth of experience, different kinds of experience that people can have in the psychedelic world.
On today's episode, Mags Houston, community host and events manager at Psychedelic Society. Hello everyone. Today we have a fascinating guest with us. Mags is a prominent figure in the realm of psychedelic advocacy, working tirelessly to bridge education, community, and policy reform. As a curator and host of various events for the Psychedelic Society, she facilitates important discussions around drug policy, psychedelic science, and mental health treatment. She is on a mission to reshape the mainstream narrative around drugs, as well as extending her expertise to the Heroic Hearts Project UK, contributing to a noble cause that aids veterans battling PTSD through psychedelic therapy, amongst many other things we will discuss today. Mags, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I think we need to delve straight into it and explain to people what are psychedelics and what they're not. Because I feel like there's a lot of people that just throw all the things in a bucket that don't have a big understanding. They just say, oh, just drugs like any other drugs. So give us some clarity.
Sure. And I want to just say up front as well, I'm not a scientist, so I don't come from that research background, but I am someone who's very passionate about the psychedelic world and what they have to offer us. So psychedelics are, the classic psychedelics are magic mushrooms. So the active compound in magic mushrooms is psilocybin, and there's a lot of research being done on that at the moment. So you may have heard of that, in relation to the work that's being done by the likes of Imperial College London in the UK. Another classic psychedelic would be ayahuasca. So ayahuasca is found typically in like South America, and indigenous cultures will do ceremonies. There's a lot of quite tourism around ayahuasca at the moment, and there are underground ceremonies in ayahuasca happening over here as well. And there are other kind of classic psychedelics. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that there is a bit of a kind of blurred line around what is psychedelic and what's not. So MDMA, for example, will often be included under the psychedelic umbrella, but it's not deemed actually a classic psychedelic because of how it works in the brain and kind of releases serotonin. And it works in a different way scientifically in the brain to how the classic psychedelics work. So with that in mind, the way in which I would speak about the benefits of classic psychedelics like ayahuasca, like magic mushrooms, are different to how MDMA, I would say, benefits people. And the research that we're getting out kind of aligns with all of that as well.
Very interesting. So I want to definitely go deeper into the MDMA branch and how is that different and why is that not it? Is weed a psychedelic?
Cannabis. So cannabis has a psychoactive compound in it, a cannabinoid called THC, but it's not deemed as a classic psychedelic.
Why?
Because of the way it works on the brain. So classic psychedelics, they inhibit the default mode network, and that allows us to really get back to that childlike state in the way that they work. So one of the researchers who was working at Imperial before, Dr. Mendel Kaelin, he came up with this amazing analogy, which is like a ski slope, like a snow-covered mountain that in a depressed person, you'll have your grooves that you normally be skiing down, and those are your kind of depressive, habitual way of thinking. When you take a classic psychedelic, it smooths over that snowy covered mountain so that you can find new ways down it. And that's what I mean by this childlike state. It enables us to see from new perspectives, see in new ways, whereas cannabis doesn't work in that way. So it has THC, which is a psychoactive compound, and that is activated by CBD. So together they create an entourage effect. So they need one another in order to work. It's the CBD that's the relaxant, kind of anti-anxiety effect. And that's why, we have this kind of stigma around cannabis as it being kind of creating laziness. And I've got a lot to say on that. I certainly don't believe that.
We'll pick this up as well, yeah.
Sure. But it's the THC that's the psychoactive part. And what we're finding in recent years is that the cannabis that one buys on the street from dealers has more and more THC in it. And that's why then we see people who might be suffering from paranoia, or, in some very rare cases, people might even...
Hi everyone, today's episode is sponsored by Momo Kombucha, my favorite non-alcoholic drink, together with water. I've now been drinking Momo Kombucha for around 6 months, and I really love their product because they're healthy, they're delicious, they keep coming out with these new flavors and limited editions. Watermelon that I tried recently that I was obsessed with. So if you want to try Momo Kombucha and you haven't yet, feel free to use the discount code ISTHISIT15 to get a 15% discount off your first order.
Report psychosis, but that's very different in the kind of street cannabis world, very different to what we're seeing in the medical world. But going back to your original question, no, it's not like a classic psychedelic.
Wow. Already many spin-offs that we need to go back to.
Yeah.
So just a side one. So CBD needs to have THC in order to work.
Yes, yeah, and this is why I have a bit of an issue with all of the products that we see in shops over the counter. I would argue that they have so little CBD in them that the effect that's really going to have is so negligible you might not even notice it.
So it's kind of false advertisement.
Yeah, it is a little bit. And that said, there is cannabis that has THC in it that is available to people, but they have to get it on prescription in the UK.
Of course. But all these, drinks, gummies, all the things that are marketed as trying to calm you down, they're not going to work unless they have the tiniest bit of THC as well, right?
In theory, yes. Although they might say otherwise. I mean, there are studies being done.
I'm just going to go out and say that scam. Okay.
I mean, do you know what? Something interesting to me is if you were, say, actually, a medical cannabis patient and you were vaporizing cannabis that has THC in it, and then you had a CBD drink, then in theory, I imagine that the drink would then
if it had sufficient amounts, though,
because it's in your system. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it would be interacting with the THC in your system. Yeah. But certainly, from my experience, I haven't experienced like a cannabis over-the-counter product, a CBD product that has had an effect on me personally. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to put it out there because I had an interesting conversation with my friend recently about this, and she was telling me just this thing. So I wanted to clarify this from you, and thank you for confirming. Okay. Scam. Okay. So going back to the thing, so the whole bucket. So it's not. Like cocaine, for example, not a psychedelic. It gives you some sort of an effect, but it's not.
It's certainly, no, cocaine is definitely not a psychedelic.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So do psychedelics have a high addiction coefficient?
No, they really don't. And that is like one of the myths, I think, that has been, that has come about as a result of all this like 50 odd years of stigma that came out of the kind of the late 60s and all the research that happened there with LSD. No, they're not addictive. I think that, it's worth mentioning at this point that there is actually research going on now that would support psychedelics for treating addiction. And that's what's really interesting. So for example, one of my colleagues, Rayan Zafar, has actually just got some funding in order to do research on gambling addiction using psychedelics. So I'm really excited about what potential psychedelics have got for treating all sorts of different addiction related conditions. So under that bracket, I would put like OCD, I'd put anorexia, because these are, again, habitual ways of thinking where we kind of are operating in an addicted frame of mind.
So do psychedelics help get rid of the addictions to substances as well, such as alcohol, smoking, and other drugs?
Yes, absolutely. The research is out there and it is phenomenal. There's been research done with alcohol and also it's worth mentioning ketamine as well. So ketamine, again, not a classic psychedelic, but it is a dissociative that is also kind of comes under the larger umbrella of psychedelics. And that's been shown as being very beneficial for treating alcohol addiction. And more research is needed, but I think that if you look at the data, which I'm not going to try and spout off to you, but it really does speak for itself, and it's an incredibly exciting potential for psychedelics. It's also worth noting that Alcoholics Anonymous was founded by a man who was actually taking LSD at the time, and AA was inspired out of his trip.
Anonymous Alcoholics, yeah?
Yeah,
wow.
Exactly. So, it's really interesting when you start looking into the history of all these things, how addiction is very much interlinked with psychedelics, and how psychedelics can really be part of the future, I think, of treating all sorts of addiction disorders.
I have some knowledge around psychedelics, and I'll tell you my story of how I even got there. But the reason why I'm kind of putting the basic facts out there is because people that haven't done the research, that have had virtually no exposure to psychedelics, they are pretty much like, my mom and dad, my grandparents, they would just say, what? What is that? What is that? Oh, it's drugs. That's it.
Yeah. And
drugs means, everything from weed to psychedelics to cocaine to heroin to crack you understand?
Absolutely.
So this is why it's so important, the things that you're telling us, because it's not to be put in the same bucket. It's something completely different. And in fact, if anything, it's something that, from the sounds of it, it can help you get rid of the serious addictions. So can you expand a little bit more on, because I'm very curious about that, why is it not addictive? Why are psychedelics not addictive? So
it really relates back to what I was saying about this ski slope, that actually rather than creating an effect where we want to take them again and again, actually what they're doing is they're kind of opening a door and showing us a new way of thinking, showing us a way in which we can solve problems. So say you were taking a psychedelic for anorexia. It's not going to cure you of anorexia, but it's going to show you how you might overcome that eating disorder. And there isn't that then need to want to have the psychedelic again. That coming out of that experience, what we're seeing from participants on trials is that they have a desire to live. They have the desire to be clean. In fact, even from my own experience on ayahuasca and many people's experience coming out of ayahuasca ceremony, is that it actually what makes them want to live a cleaner, healthier life. And with ayahuasca in particular, I think it's interesting because many people would do like a dieta and before going into ceremony. So that what that means is they might spend a couple of weeks cutting out sugar, salt, fatty stuff. Like they might cut out sex, they might cut out alcohol. All of this is advised before going into an ayahuasca ceremony. And then coming out of it, certainly I found alcohol just didn't appeal. Yeah. And also, drinking caffeine and eating sugary food didn't appeal anymore. So they really do the opposite, I feel, of what an addictive medications do. And this what plays in perfectly with my frustration around the current kind of drugs culture in which we live. Because you may have heard of, like the Sackler situation with the opiate crisis in the 90s and all of these addictive medications which are prescribed so readily. In the UK, but in the States, it's become kind of very, very well known that there are all these addictive, highly addictive medications that are prescribed by doctors and people...
Such as
opioids, So I think it's really, really important that people don't...
I'm so sorry, what falls under that category?
Opioids, like painkillers.
Okay, yeah.
Painkillers. But also benzodiazepines as well, which are a category of antidepressants, highly, highly addictive, and yet prescribed for many years.
And casually, I might say, prescribed. Just from the stories of my friends, very casually.
Very casually prescribed, without informed consent. consent, meaning that at the point of prescription, the patient is not informed about the side effects and the harms, the long-term effects of these medications. So you have this like strange situation where psychedelics are for the most part illegal and highly stigmatized, and people think they're addictive and they're actually not. At the same time as we're prescribing all of these opioids, benzodiazepines, and highly addictive medications, which are perfectly legal. So this is where like my kind of, I get riled up.
Strange. Very, very strange. Yeah. I think we are more and more entering in a time where people are getting more educated and they are starting to, at least on some level, question the status quo, I would like to think, or maybe I'm living in a bubble with such people.
I like to think so too. I do like to think so too.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things that don't make sense, and I think people are kind of waking up to that and they're doing their own research. For myself, I was raised in a family where, obviously no drugs, no alcohol, no smoking, nothing. So kind of a very, strict view on all of that, and that was completely fine with me, very, very aligned, and never had, a reason to rebel against that, because I just remember we had this biology class where they showed us a video how all of those substances destroy your brain. Quite literally. Well, we're talking about alcohol, we're talking about heroin, we're talking about cocaine, we're talking about like all the drugs. We're talking about
and some of them.
I'm sure there was also some psychedelics, probably MDMA, but I don't remember. It was a long time ago.
Okay.
But I just saw that and I was like, well, I don't want to be brain dead. Thank you very much. So no.
Do you know what this reminds me of?
Yeah.
That scene in Mean Girls where it's like, if you have sex, you will get pregnant and you will get chlamydia and you will die. It's like that kind of trajectory.
That escalated quickly. So then I think I was back here in London already. I had just moved, and I started being interested in investing and in investments. Yeah. And so at the back of that, I stumbled upon research and companies that were doing some trials with psilocybin, I think the active ingredient in ketamine, and MDMA. And I saw a documentary and I was like, wow, this is really completely different from the stigma or the story, the narrative that I had been told, that it's just bad, it's death, goodbye. So that's when I kind of started looking more and more into it, started researching, and the benefits were seeming incredible from psilocybin. Exactly, you treat PTSD, you just become a better person by reconnecting to your true self, your true desire, discover who you are, what your values are, and a myriad of other things. And so it just seemed to have this capacity to improve people's lives drastically just from one time of administration as well.
One dosing.
Obviously, we're talking here about supervised procedures,
and
at
with
least in this
therapy
documentary.
as well. It will be with therapy.
So from then on, I kind of shifted my perspective on that, and I was more open to, at some point in the right time, to try that for myself, be it obviously psilocybin or something else. So yeah, that was kind of the shift of the perspective for me. But I'm just very aware how many people, including many of my acquaintances and friends, are still in that previous place where I was. So that's why I also was very excited to have this conversation, just shed a little bit more light constructively.
Sure.
So, okay. So can you tell me then, how are people, so we mentioned, so we have magic mushrooms with psilocybin, we have ketamine, we have MDMA, which you said is different. Can you elaborate on that again?
Yeah, of course. So MDMA is a drug which really floods our system with serotonin. This is something that the classic psychedelics
feel good.
Yes,
hormone,
the feel good chemical, exactly. Yeah. So when you take MDMA, you really feel this kind of whoosh of love, of empathy. And actually, my boss, Professor David Nutt, he always talks about how MDMA should have been called empathy rather than being called ecstasy, which is what it became famous as in the late 80s, early 90s. MDMA, it will typically kind of come on after maybe 15 minutes to half an hour. And yeah, it will stay in the system for maybe up to kind of 3-4 hours. And what we're seeing is it is incredibly effective for PTSD. And it's an organisation called MAPS, which are based out in the US, who are doing trials. They've just done a second phase 3 trial, I believe, which is looking into treating PTSD with MDMA, and the results are incredible. So incredible that they're hopeful that MDMA will be rescheduled to be legally prescribed as a medicine in the US by the end of 2024.
Incredible.
And our hope is that the UK will follow suit. Increasingly so, and certainly the previous decades have shown us that the UK does follow suit often, does kind of follow in the footsteps of the US.
For good
it
or
didn't
bad.
used to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way. We should be leading the way here. But I do think that if the FDA approve MDMA as a medicine, then our government will be hard pressed to say no when we are knocking on their door, in a year or so's time. But yeah, MDMA is, we think, safer as a first treatment for people who have suffered severe trauma than perhaps going straight to the likes of psilocybin. Because of the way it works, it enables us to let down all of our inhibitions and to just really feel love. And if we've been through something very traumatic, so for example, if in a case of a veteran has been serving in Afghanistan and has seen their friend being shot, it might be that their traumatic response to that was to dissociate and to block that out. MDMA will enable them to really access that memory, feel it, but come to terms with it in a way that without that substance would be just too painful. Now, the reason that that many of us feel that MDMA would be better to start off with than going to psilocybin is psilocybin is a little bit maybe more unpredictable as to where you might go and
because
how
it takes you on a journey.
Yes, it really does take you on a journey, for sure. And so what I'm hearing increasingly is that MDMA might be good to start off with for someone who's suffered severe trauma, and then as maybe a second treatment option, say a few months later, then maybe psilocybin, perhaps even combined with MDMA, but there still needs to be more research done around the kind of drug combinations. So yeah, that's probably important to mention.
Amazing. Thank you for expanding on that. So you said also ayahuasca is one of them.
Yeah.
Iboga. I ask that because sometimes I hear people that have done ayahuasca, which you already mentioned, sometimes mention iboga. They mention this cactus, this toad.
San Pedro,
yes,
peyote.
Yes. So there's
and DMT.
DMT. I was going to say that as well. Do you have any sort of comment on the DMT or any of those?
DMT is an interesting one because it's so short acting.
Is that natural or chemical?
That is natural, yeah. So DMT is found in the toad, which is why you mentioned the toad. And it tends to, its effects come on after about 15, 20, or it lasts about 15, 20 minutes. Its effects come on straight away, and can really take you on a very intense journey. And that's in comparison with ayahuasca, which usually might last about kind of 8 to 10 hours. Magic mushrooms might last 4 or 5 hours. LSD would last maybe 10 to 12 hours.
And we have LSD.
We have LSD.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's the big one.
Okay.
But yeah, DMT is the short-acting psychedelic compound, and because it's so short-acting, it's starting to be researched more and more, because it might be that would be perhaps, some might argue, a more appropriate, more useful tool in healthcare, because we're not having to guide someone, use therapy with someone for many hours at a time. So it could be a less expensive option of the future, perhaps. And there's an organisation called Small Pharma who've been doing research into DMT in the UK. So I'd recommend, looking into their research for the latest data.
Does shorter also mean more intense?
It can do. Obviously, it depends on the individual. It depends on dosage, but certainly the reports from DMT experiences can be incredibly intense, and typically reports of seeing different entities, you know, like that typical kind of psychedelic alien, you know, world. That is the kind of experience people have on DMT.
Do you see a world where in some years somebody that's doesn't have a clinically diagnosed depression or doesn't have PTSD, but is someone that wants to improve themselves, want to work on their mindset, on their general well-being, that they can go to a facility, a professional facility, and have a consultation and have like a menu almost of all these drugs with an explanation, guided instruction onto how it would impact them, and this advisory, and then go into this for that purpose, for betterment, for purpose of improving themselves?
I really hope so. There has been, you know, research done with healthy volunteers, as well as people with depression, with other mental health diagnoses. Certainly, I would love to see a world where we could go into a safe environment, whether that is a clinic, a more medical environment, or perhaps an environment where, you know, people have trained with different medicines and have that expertise without it needing to be a certificate on a wall, you know? So there's a real breadth of experience, different kinds of experience that people can have in the psychedelic world, which is incredibly controversial, you know, and sparks a lot of debate as to who is qualified to administer psychedelics. That's a whole podcast in itself. But I would love to be in a world where we could choose the option that's right for us, and it not need to be to treat a particular condition. Because I know from my own experience as someone who is quite healthy, I don't have a mental health diagnosis at the moment, I have found psychedelics to be incredibly positively impactful. And that doesn't mean that the experience itself is always
pleasant,
a walk in the park, or pleasant by any means. And that's something I want to really, really emphasize. Going through a psychedelic experience can be harrowing. It can be terrifying. But the hope is that what it shows us, as I mentioned before, like opening that door to new possibilities and new ideas, that is worth it. It's worth going through that suffering and through maybe the pain of the experience itself to find those realizations on the other side.
So fascinating, just from listening on that description. It's kind of like going to the gym or taking a bitter medicine. You kind of do it because you know that it's going to bring some benefit to you. Whereas the reality, we live in this world where you are prescribed these pills that taste like nothing. They don't feel bad, and they, you know, treat the symptoms, but then actually don't treat the root cause, and you don't get better. You actually get sicker sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's just so crazy how the world is warped when you zoom out enough and you just look at the kind of from a bird's eye view perspective from things. But yeah, so that's very, very fascinating. And tell me about your work in terms of the drug policy advocacy, and what sort of hurdles have you encountered, and what are you working on in that?
Yeah, thank you. So my own journey working in the drug policy world started about started 3 years ago. My own experience with the drug policy world started 3 years ago, and it was really for me born out of a personal situation where my best friend was severely depressed and had all sorts of diagnoses, and nothing was working. None of the prescribed medications were having the desired effect, and she was still in the depths of depression. And we together took it upon ourselves to do all of our research, and I found out about the psychedelic research that's been ongoing for a few years in this so-called renaissance of research. And the deeper I dug, the more I was like, why didn't I know about this before? And this is something that really matters to me. This is a world I want to work in. And I was working in advertising before, selling my soul to the devil, and was lacking this purpose. And it was really clear to me that drug policy was the world I wanted to work in. And I think where I've been able to I hope, add value is really in bringing this research and the science behind psychedelics to people who wouldn't normally come across it. So students, for example, we've been doing at Drug Science, which is the charity I work for, we've been doing lots of events with students at all universities around the UK to engage them in drug policy, drug science, and particularly psychedelics, because they all want to hear about psychedelics, especially if they've watched How to Change Your Mind on Netflix, which is Michael Pollan's documentary. They're fascinated to know about LSD and psilocybin in particular, and DMT. And then, that's the science bit, but then we start talking to them about how we got here and the last 50 years and how so much politics and racism played into all of these drugs. Racism, 100%. Getting so much part of the journey into why these drugs have been so highly stigmatized. So take cannabis, for example. Cannabis was used by a Mexican population in the US, which is why then Nixon decided to brand it as marijuana, to use that kind of stigmatized language in order to make it seem like a Mexican thing, when actually it was, something that had been used as a medicine for millennia. Also, it was very popular with like Black jazz musicians. So again, in stigmatizing, in talking negatively about cannabis, he is essentially saying, the people who are taking these substances, they are bad people. And guess what? So many of them were actually Black Afro-Caribbean people in the US, and as I say, jazz musicians. It's ridiculous when you look back at the history of how we have come to think so negatively about cannabis, about psychedelics, about drugs in general, actually. And it's something that really is dear to my heart, because I think there could be so many people that could be helped right now by these drugs that that they just can't access. Going back to cannabis, cannabis was, as I said, like a medicine for millennia. It's been used in ancient China, in India, in ancient Egypt, I do believe, and yet in the 20th century, we decided that it was bad and should be made illegal. Now, I've got a new battle on my hands, just coming back to running events, whereby I'm trying to burst the bubble around cannabis and help educate people who are so-called cannabis naive, so people who don't use cannabis, who don't necessarily know about its health benefits, trying to educate people about what is happening with cannabis, about how many conditions are actually being helped. And tomorrow, I am going to be hosting the UK Patient Conference for Medical Cannabis Awareness Week. It's only the second year it's run, and it's only 5 years since cannabis was made legal in the UK. And yet so many...
Didn't know that.
I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised. So many people don't know.
Okay.
So many people don't know. We know that there could be about 1.5 million people in the UK who are currently self-medicating with cannabis, but they're buying it from their dealer. So they're risking they're risking their livelihood. They're risking being caught.
That's not legal? I'm so confused.
No, so they're self-medicating from cannabis used by their dealer, whereas we've only got about 30 to 40,000 people in the UK with prescriptions for medical cannabis.
Oh, okay. So legal
Huge
meaning
difference.
prescribed.
Yes, prescribed by a specialist consultant, not by your GP, that's still illegal, and not prescribed on the NHS because no one is doing it. Not because it's illegal, but none of the NHS consultants are doing it. It's new and it's not supported by our NHS prescribing guidelines. They're called NICE guidelines. At the moment, it's only in the guidelines for a specialist consultant to prescribe whole plant cannabis for chemo-induced nausea and vomiting, for muscle spasms, so for example like multiple sclerosis, and for one other, which has completely slipped my mind. But the point is there are so many other conditions that could be helped with cannabis that are being proven to be helped with cannabis, but NHS just is not supporting prescribing.
And that's kind of what you're fighting for.
Fighting very hard for that. Yeah, very much so. So tomorrow's event will all be about bringing people together to celebrate how far we've come, but it's not as far as we'd hoped. And that's the God's honest truth. Like, we wish that we could have made this mainstream by now. And the fact that you don't know that cannabis is a legal medicine in the UK, that says it all.
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't. Okay, so we've spoken about a lot of incredible things about psychedelics. So, to be correct, what are the downsides? What are the risks? What are people risking potentially if they go that route and they never have before?
Yeah, sure. That's a really good question. I think the important thing here to say is it really is important about how, where, when you decide to have a psychedelic journey. In the UK, it's currently illegal to take psilocybin, to do ayahuasca, to take MDMA, unless it's in a clinical trial, of course. And yet it's happening. It's happening all over the place. There are lots of underground ceremonies and experiences popping up. And because it's illegal, there's no regulation around these things. I'm not about to say you shouldn't be doing an underground ceremony in South London. I believe that there are really experienced, really wonderful guides out there, but it is still illegal. And in taking part in a ceremony like that, you are putting yourself in danger, because if something does go wrong, then you don't have the infrastructure around you and the support that you would have if you were doing something legally above board. So I would say the dangers are, from that kind of legality perspective, very real. Also from like a medical perspective, you might think you don't have a history of, psychosis, for example, and then lo and behold, you go and do an ayahuasca ceremony, and it turns out that actually you are predisposed.
And how does that turn out exactly?
It could turn out very badly.
You come
could
back
end up in
different
hospital.
and never come back.
Or that it could open a can of worms, and you could find yourself in an unstable mental state, more unstable than you were before. Potentially very long term. Potentially. Everyone is so different, and you might think that you're okay going into it, and actually you're not. So I would say it's really important to really look hard at your medical history, and then if you do think you're okay, to ensure that the person who's facilitating is very experienced, that you've been recommended by the right people. You've not just found it on some kind of Instagram ad, for example. Dark web, heaven forbid. Yeah, that you've really done your research before embarking on a psychedelic journey. So safety is key, and make sure there are people around you who know what they're doing.
Definitely very, very sound advice. I think people need to be prepared. They need to be well researched, but take all the precautions that they can, for sure. 100%. So as much as it has all these incredible benefits to it, still exercise caution, because it is a potent substance.
It really is.
So from your experience, what are some common misconceptions that you've come across that people have around psychedelics?
Ooh, common misconceptions. I think there are some common misconceptions that they're going to make you go kind of mad and jump out a window, and I know why these.
Yeah, I heard that before when I was younger. Yeah,
and I know why these misconceptions exist, because you only have to look at the media, and this is media, since the 1950s, where it was like, I think there was a headline which was like, girl on LSD gives birth to a frog, and there was another one where it was like, guy on psychedelics cuts off his penis or something.
What?
Like, utterly horrendous stuff, and just not based on any truth whatsoever. So I feel that the media has a lot to answer for, and still does. The way in which the press reports on drugs in general, and about people who take drugs, is so highly stigmatized. It gets me so angry. And we're at Drug Science, we will often share like news articles and point out where they are using incorrect, accurately information that is completely inaccurate, that is not based on science. And that's why it's really important that people take anything, especially with a pinch of salt, especially from certain publications. I'm not going to name any in particular, but there are some who just seem to want to appeal to an older, maybe middle-class conservative listener, reader, and it's clickbait rather than actually being based on facts.
Oh my God, don't even get me started with the publications and media. The more I go forward in my life, the more I just can't take them seriously, whatsoever. And it's sad because there's so many talented and educated and eloquent people working in these institutions. It's incredible, but unfortunately, the way the machine works is just not incentivized to put forward the truth oftentimes.
Exactly. And I think that then filters through, into how people vote. And you can see how that then, affects whether governments are going to want to support the work we're doing. There's been a great campaign over the past year or so called the PAR campaign, PAR, which is psilocybin access rights. And this is a movement to try and get psilocybin rescheduled. So moved from Schedule 1 in the UK to Schedule 2, which would enable it to be more accessible for research and be really deemed as a medicine. Yeah. And we're trying to get the government to listen, to realize that actually psilocybin could be an incredibly important treatment option, especially in a healthcare system that's suffering. The NHS is, at an all-time low in terms of how quickly patients can be seen and treated. And actually, psychedelics could play a really important part in helping to ease that load. But the government don't want to know about it because they're still thinking, well, what's going to get us the most votes? And there's still a huge cohort of people that are still stuck in that conservative mindset as a result of the media, all of this false propaganda that just won't want to support those kind of campaigns. So it will be a tipping scale, though. Yeah. And I do think that in the next few years, we will see it tip in our favour. And I would hope that the government will start to appreciate that actually the majority of voters are in support of psilocybin rescheduling, are in support of cannabis being prescribed on the NHS, and they are getting wise to the truth around these drugs that have been completely stigmatized over the last 50 years.
Very interesting time of history. I like that you mentioned the word Renaissance. I was just about to ask you about that as well. I think that's exactly what we're experiencing. And do you have a take on why that is? I think it's just this level of kind of information and education that we have readily available at our fingertips. Yes, it can be overwhelming and it has many minuses, but it also has pluses. And it is that kind of critical thinking that people are starting to develop and just doing their own research.
Sure. Yeah, the Renaissance word is one that has been bandied about a lot over the last few years around psychedelics in the Western world. I'm careful to attribute it to the resurgence in research and not in the use of psychedelics, because indigenous cultures and Eastern cultures have been using psychedelics as part of their medicines for millennia. So I want to really acknowledge that. And in terms of the Renaissance in the West...
So it never stopped for them.
It never stopped, no. Okay, we just weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Renaissance in terms of our research into psychedelics, I think it's an interesting point. It feels like maybe even internet culture and social media has played a part in this, because it's not so easy to hide the truth anymore, perhaps. And then there was research done by Johns Hopkins in the early 2010s around treating people with cancer with psilocybin from magic mushrooms, which showed amazing results. And then it kind of caught on. In the UK, I mentioned at the start, Imperial College London have been the main body doing the research into psychedelics. And the more people hear about the research being done and the incredible data results from those trials, the more others start. And so now, that we're seeing that resurgence in research, but it's not back up to where it was in the late 60s, not by any means.
But I think in the late 60s, it was the first time introduction, right, to the Western culture, at least in the recent history. And so, as the first time, like there's this excitement and not necessarily all of this education out there that we have now. So it might have gone like this, kind of like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then it went like this. And then now it's kind of slowly going back up, but in a more controlled, moderate way that hopefully is also more lasting. So maybe it's just something that we had to go through to get to this point today.
Absolutely. And the kind of trials that we're doing now, randomized controlled trials where you have a placebo and controlled group, they are incredibly expensive. So it makes sense that these things have to go very slowly. Only certain bodies around the world, only certain establishments are actually able to afford to do this research, even though many of us might want to do it. So we have to be very particular about choosing what would be the most kind of strategic conditions to research with what psychedelic in order to shift policy, in order to shift drug policy, both in the UK and also internationally. What will make the biggest difference?
So we've spoken a lot about psychedelics themselves, but I want to talk about you a little bit more. So you mentioned kind of what got you on to the path of psychedelics.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned my favorite word of purpose. So can you tell me what your purpose is?
Yes. Yeah. The word that comes up for me when I think about my purpose is community. It really is. So I work for the Psychedelic Society as well as for Drug Science. And these are two organizations that are incredibly important to me. And they're both organizations that have community at the heart of them. For me, I have recently moved away from London. I've moved to a city called Brighton on the south coast of England. And community is part of every decision I'm making at the moment. I'm thinking, right, how can I find my people? How can I find my tribe? And how can I get back to a way of living that is more akin to how I'm evolved to be? So as someone who's thinking about having a family in the future, how can I bring up a child in an environment where it's not just me left at home looking after a baby, but actually I've got people, I've got a support network around me who are there to support with that. How can I have people in my life that I see every day rather than just go to an event and see them there? I really want to see how I can make community the purpose in my life and bring community to other people. So my work in the Psychedelic Society is really focused at the moment around community. During COVID, I was very much focused on panel discussions and webinars around psychedelic science and mental health. But since COVID, and we've been getting back to more in-person events, it's the community stuff that's been making me tick. What that looks like is monthly socials that we do in East London and also Bristol and increasingly so in Brighton. I also run an event called Speed Friending, which is like speed dating, but it's to make platonic friendships.
Sweet.
It's so sweet. It's really fun. And people leave these events feeling nourished. They tell me that, wow, like, I've had conversations this evening that I wouldn't have even had with like my best friend because I wouldn't have thought to ask these questions that we're posing. And we're engaging people in the kind of conversations that cut through small talk, the kind of conversations that leave you feeling like, that was meaningful. That really meant something. And that's where it all aligns for me with purpose and the community. Like, it's establishing connections that could really lead to great things. And of course, that is the mycelium network, right? That is really what we want to create. That's what I want to create in the work that I do.
Beautiful. Thank you. Actually, for people that have no idea what mycelium network is, can you tell them?
Yeah, the mycelium network is the network of like the mushrooms, form underground where they all talk to each other. And if anyone has done psychedelics watching this, and especially magic mushrooms, psilocybin, you have probably become aware in some capacity of that mycelium network, that we are all connected in some way. We're connected with nature, we're connected with each other, with ourselves as well. So it's all about connection.
Thank you. So to wrap this up, I like to ask one question, which most of the people seem to be very interested in. What is your recipe for happiness?
My recipe for happiness?
Yes.
I feel like I'm going to be banging the drum of connection now, aren't I? My recipe of happiness is having people in my life who I care about and who care about me, and showing kindness to them, not expecting anything back. And yeah, a sense of belonging that comes from having those connections and those friendships in my life. That brings me real happiness.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very wholesome. Actually, I'm going to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
Is there something that I should have asked you that I haven't?
Oh, the thing that comes up for me is really around, what I'm striving for going forward. In particular, I mentioned that the reason I do all this work, it really all stems back to my best friend, and she's still very unwell. And I don't want to, pretend that psychedelics have been a cure for her. Absolutely not. And I don't think psychedelics are a cure for anyone, as we've mentioned already. They give us tools.
Yeah.
My friend is still very unwell, and my hope is that we can keep building or working towards building a healthcare system that can support people who don't have the financial means and the support network around them to get out of that rut at the moment. So it's really a socio-economic issue. It's systemic. My hope for the future is that we can start recognizing that people's financial circumstances, where they live, if they grow up in poverty, if they have an abusive parent at home, all of these things are affecting how we are in the world, our mental health. And actually, rather than putting labels on ourselves, rather than diagnosing one another with disorders, actually looking at what's happening to us and how our upbringing, our background, who and what we have around us is the cause of stuff we're going through, and how that might then hold the key for how we might find happiness and joy in life.
Which brings you back to the community, which is your purpose.
There you go. It all links up.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mags.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dana.
Thank you. Hello friends, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe and share it with someone. I would love to hear your feedback and suggestions as to what guests you would like to see on the show next. See you next week.